Maggie Sullivan's hands trembled as she touched the lump on her neck. Walnut-sized, hard, growing. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, 58 years old, graying hair pulled back, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. On the vanity beside her lay the blue knit scarf, its color faded from years of wear. Tom's last gift before his heart gave out 5 years ago. The old radio on the shelf crackled softly, playing You Send Me by Sam Cooke, their song. She tried to smile at the memory, but winced instead. Swallowing hurt now. Her coffee sat untouched on the counter, steam rising in the October morning light. The phone rang. Sarah's number flashed on the screen. Maggie's finger traced an old scar on her neck, barely visible, nearly forgotten. 30 years old. She'd told everyone it was barbed wire. She had no idea that lie was about to kill her.
Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Riverside, Oregon was the kind of town where everybody knew your name and half your business. Population 2,000, give or take a few souls who wandered in or out with the seasons. The Columbia River carved through the landscape like a silver ribbon, and Maggie's small wooden house perched on its bank, windows facing the water Tom had loved. She'd lived there alone since his heart attack in 2019. 5 years of silence, broken only by the river's murmur and the occasional visit from her daughter Sarah. Maggie had been a teacher for 30 years, elementary school, 2nd grade mostly. She knew how to tie shoelaces with arthritic fingers and wipe tears with patience. The children called her Mrs. Sullivan, and she'd watched generations of them grow up, get married, have babies of their own. She'd retired 2 years ago, but the town still stopped her at the grocery store to chat. Independence had always been her armor. She fixed her own leaky faucet, chopped her own firewood, drove herself everywhere, even when her hip complained on cold mornings. She wouldn't be a burden, not to anyone, especially not to Sarah. The blue scarf never left her side. Tom had given it to her the week before he died, wrapped in tissue paper with a note. For my Maggie, who keeps me warm. She wore it every day now, winter or summer, wrapped around her neck like a promise. But there were things about Maggie Sullivan that even Riverside didn't know, like the brother who'd come home from Vietnam, broken and hollow-eyed. Frank Sullivan, 2 years older than Maggie, who'd died in 1996 in the Montana woods. Suicide, the death certificate said. Only Maggie knew why. Like the son she'd lost 10 years ago. Michael, her firstborn, killed when a drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 84. His medical bills had nearly bankrupted them before he died. Tom had worked double shifts for 2 years trying to pay them off. Like the scars she carried, one on her neck, barely visible, one on her shoulder, hidden beneath clothing, both from bullets, both from men she'd loved, both secrets she'd protected with silence. Sarah knew some of it, not all. Sarah was 32 now, a nurse at Riverside General Hospital, divorced, raising 4-year-old Emma alone. She worked long shifts and drove 45 minutes each way from Portland. She called every Sunday, visited when she could. Maggie heard the exhaustion in her daughter's voice and never asked for more. The lump had appeared 3 weeks ago. Maggie had noticed it while fastening a necklace. She'd told herself it was nothing, just a swollen gland. It would go away. It hadn't gone away. It had grown. And now Sarah was calling, probably to announce her weekly visit. Maggie looked at the phone, then at the lump in the mirror. She answered, "Mom, I'm coming over today." Sarah's voice carried that nurse-firm tone that Maggie recognized. Not a request, a statement. "Honey, it's your day off. You should rest. I'm bringing Emma. She misses you." Maggie's resistance crumbled at the mention of her granddaughter. "Okay, I'll make cookies. Don't overdo it, Mom." After hanging up, Maggie stood in the kitchen, staring at her hands. They shook slightly as she reached for the flour canister. When had that started? She wrapped the blue scarf tighter around her neck, hiding the lump, and began measuring ingredients. 2 hours later, Sarah's Honda pulled into the gravel driveway. Emma exploded from the back seat, pigtails bouncing, clutching a drawing she'd made at preschool. "Grandma!" The 4-year-old crashed into Maggie's legs with the force of pure joy. "Easy, sweetheart." Maggie bent down, wincing slightly, and wrapped her arms around the small body. Emma smelled like grape juice and crayons. Sarah approached more slowly, medical bag over her shoulder even on her day off. She studied her mother with the careful assessment of someone trained to notice what others missed. "You look tired, Mom." "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." Maggie ushered them inside, where warm cookies waited on the counter. While Emma settled at the kitchen table with milk and cookies, Sarah followed her mother to the sink. "Mom, what's going on with your neck?" Maggie's hand flew to the scarf. "Nothing. Why? You keep touching it. And the scarf, it's 80 degrees outside." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Let me see." "Sarah, really, it's nothing." "Mom." That nurse voice again. "Let me see." Emma piped up from the table, mouth full of cookie. "Grandma, why is your neck so big?" The innocent question hung in the air like a bomb. Sarah's face went pale. Maggie felt her daughter's fingers already reaching for the scarf, and she couldn't stop her. The scarf slipped away. Sarah's professional mask shattered. "Jesus, Mom! How long have you had this?" "It's just swollen lymph nodes. It'll go away." Sarah's hands were already examining the lump, gentle but thorough. Maggie saw her daughter's jaw tighten, saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. Too large, too hard, too fixed. "We're going to the hospital." "Now." "Sarah, I don't need—" "Now, Mom." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Please." "I don't have insurance anymore. You know that. After your father died, I couldn't afford— I don't care about the money." "Well, I do." Maggie pulled away, wrapping the scarf back around her neck with shaking fingers. "I won't spend my last years drowning in medical bills. I saw what happened to Michael. I won't do that to you." "Last years?" Sarah's voice rose. "Mom, don't talk like that." "I'm being realistic." "You're being stubborn." Emma started crying. Both women stopped, guilt washing over them. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, wiping tears. "It's okay, baby. Mommy and Grandma are just talking." Maggie sat down heavily at the table, suddenly exhausted. Emma climbed into her lap, small arms wrapping around her neck, carefully avoiding the lump she'd noticed. "Don't be sad, Grandma," Emma whispered. Sarah remained on her knees, looking up at her mother. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, raw. "Mom, I lost Dad 5 years ago. I lost Michael 10 years before that. I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose you too." "Not when we can do something about it." Maggie stroked Emma's hair, feeling the weight of her granddaughter. the weight of her daughter's fear, the weight of the secret she'd carried for 30 years. "What if it's nothing?" she said weakly. "Then we'll know it's nothing." "But, Mom," Sarah stood, wiping her eyes, "you know what this looks like. You're not stupid. I'm not stupid. That's not a swollen lymph node." Maggie looked at Emma's drawing on the table. It showed a house by a river, stick figures holding hands. A large yellow sun in the corner, the word family spelled in wobbly letters. "Any old injuries?" Sarah asked, her nurse training kicking in. "Trauma to your neck? Anything I should know about?" Maggie's mind flashed to Montana, 1994. Frank's horrified face. The gun. The blood. The lie they'd told together. "Nothing important," she heard herself say. Sarah studied her mother's face for a long moment. "You're lying to me." "Sarah, but we'll deal with that later. Right now we're going to the hospital. Emma can stay with the Robertsons next door. Get your purse." Maggie looked at her daughter, strong, determined Sarah, and finally nodded. "Just an exam," she said. "Nothing more." "We'll see," Sarah replied, already pulling out her phone. Riverside General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Maggie had visited this building too many times. When Tom collapsed in the garden, when Michael lingered for 3 days before the machines were turned off. The memories pressed against her chest as Sarah guided her through the automatic doors. Emma had been left with Mrs. Robertson, their elderly neighbor who'd promised hot chocolate and cartoons. The drive had been silent, except for the radio, playing songs neither woman heard. The emergency room wasn't busy for a Sunday afternoon. Sarah bypassed the registration desk and walked straight to the triage station, where a young nurse Maggie didn't recognize looked up. "Sarah, hey, I thought you were off today." "I am." "This is my mother. She needs to see Dr. Mitchell immediately." The nurse glanced at Maggie, then at the scarf around her neck. Something passed between the two medical professionals, a language of concern that needed no words. "Room 3, I'll page him." Sarah took her mother's elbow, steering her down the familiar hallway. Maggie wanted to resist, to turn around and go home, but Emma's face floated in her mind. That drawing, that word, family. Room 3 was small and cold. Maggie sat on the examination table, paper crinkling beneath her. Sarah stood by the door, arms crossed, looking more like a sentry than a daughter. "You didn't have to call ahead," Maggie said quietly. "Yes, I did." Before Maggie could respond, the door opened. Dr. James Mitchell entered, mid-40s, graying at the temples, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent 20 years in emergency medicine. He'd treated Tom the day he died. He remembered. "Mrs. Sullivan," he nodded respectfully. "Sarah says you've got something we should look at. It's probably nothing. Then it'll take 2 minutes to confirm that." He pulled on gloves, his movements efficient. "May I?" Maggie's hands moved to unwrap the blue scarf. They trembled. Dr. Mitchell waited patiently while she exposed her neck. His face remained professionally neutral, but Maggie saw his eyes sharpen with focus. His fingers probed the lump carefully, methodically. He asked her to swallow, to turn her head, to lift her chin. "How long have you had this, Mrs. Sullivan?" 3 weeks, maybe a month." "Any pain? Difficulty swallowing?" "Some. It's gotten worse." "Any weight loss? Night sweats? Fever?" Maggie thought about her clothes hanging looser, the way she'd started sleeping in Tom's old sweatshirt because she was always cold. "Maybe. A little." Dr. Mitchell stepped back, removing his gloves. "I'm ordering an ultrasound. Right now." "Is that necessary?" Maggie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes." His tone left no room for argument. He turned to Sarah. "Can you take her to radiology?" "Of course." As Dr. Mitchell left, Maggie rewrapped the scarf with careful fingers. "You're all overreacting." "Mom, stop!" Sarah's voice was sharp. "Just stop pretending this is fine." "It's not fine. That thing is the size of a—" She cut herself off, pressing her palms to her eyes. "I see these every day, Mom. I know what they look like." The ultrasound room was darker than the examination room. A technician, older woman, kind eyes, had Maggie lie back on the table. The gel was cold against her skin. The probe pressed into her neck, and Maggie stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them to avoid looking at the screen. But she could see Sarah watching the monitor, could see her daughter's face growing more strained with each passing minute. The technician's movements slowed. She lingered over one area, pressing harder. Then she set down the probe and said, "I'll be right back." She wasn't gone long. When she returned, Dr. Mitchell was with her. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'd like to take a look myself, if you don't mind." The gel was reapplied. The probe returned to her neck. Maggie watched Dr. Mitchell's face this time, saw him pause, zoom in, angle the probe differently. "There," he murmured to the technician. "Do you see it?" "Yes, that's what I called you about." Dr. Mitchell set down the probe and turned to face Maggie. His expression was careful, measured. "Mrs. Sullivan, the mass itself is concerning. We'll need a biopsy. But there's something else." Sarah moved closer to the bed, her hand finding her mother's. "The ultrasound shows what appears to be a foreign body, a metallic object, embedded in the tissue near the mass. It's creating a significant acoustic shadow." He paused. "Have you ever been shot, Mrs. Sullivan?" The room seemed to tilt. Maggie's ears rang. Sarah's hand tightened around hers. "What?" Sarah whispered. Dr. Mitchell pulled up an image on the screen, pointing to a bright white spot surrounded by dark tissue. "This is metallic. Given the shape and density, it appears to be a bullet fragment, or possibly shrapnel." Maggie's mouth went dry. Montana. Frank's horrified face. The barrel of the rifle. The explosion of pain. The blood on the leaves. "Mom?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Maggie's voice cracked. "It was an accident. A long time ago." "You were shot?" Sarah's professional composure shattered completely. "When? How?" 30 years ago. Hunting trip in Montana." The words came out flat, mechanical, with Frank. "My brother. It was an accident." Dr. Mitchell was already making notes. "The fragment appears to have been there for decades, based on the surrounding scar tissue. Mrs. Sullivan, this is important. Was it properly treated at the time?" Maggie closed her eyes. "We told them it was barbed wire." "At the clinic. I didn't want—" She stopped, couldn't finish. "You didn't want what?" Sarah's voice was rising. "You've been carrying a bullet in your neck for 30 years? Sarah, Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Why didn't you get it removed?" "Because Frank would have gone to prison." The words burst out before Maggie could stop them. Silence fell like a curtain. Dr. Mitchell and the technician exchanged glances. Sarah stared at her mother as if seeing a stranger. "We need a CT scan," Dr. Mitchell said quietly, "and a biopsy. I'm also calling in Dr. Rebecca Carter from oncology." The word hung in the air. Oncology. Cancer. The biopsy was scheduled for the following morning. Maggie spent the night at Sarah's apartment in Portland, a small two-bedroom with Emma's toys scattered across the living room floor. Sarah had called her ex-husband to keep Emma for the night, not wanting her daughter to sense the tension that crackled between mother and grandmother like electricity before a storm. They ate dinner in silence, leftover chicken that neither of them tasted. Sarah's fork scraped against her plate with a sound that made Maggie's teeth ache. Finally, Sarah set down her fork. "I want to know everything." "Sarah, everything, Mom. You don't get to keep secrets anymore. Not about this." Maggie wrapped the blue scarf tighter around her neck, a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing. It was 1994, October. Frank had been living in Montana for 2 years by then, up in the woods near Glacier National Park. He'd come back from Vietnam different, broken. She paused, the memories flooding back. He had nightmares. Couldn't hold down a job. The VA offered pills and pamphlets, but nothing that actually helped. Sarah waited, her face unreadable in the dim kitchen light. "I went to visit him. Your father, Tom, he told me not to go. Said Frank needed professional help, not a camping trip. But Frank was my brother. I couldn't just abandon him." Maggie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We went hunting on the second day. Frank seemed better, calmer. We saw a deer, and Frank raised his rifle. Then he just froze. His eyes went somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't reach." "PTSD," Sarah said clinically. "We didn't call it that back then. We called it the war, or what happened over there." Frank turned around, and he was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing me. He was seeing something else. Someone else. Maggie's hands trembled. "He pulled the trigger." Sarah's breath caught. "The bullet hit my neck, just below my ear, fragmented on the bone. I remember falling. The leaves, the blood. Then Frank was there, screaming my name, himself again. He was sobbing, holding me, begging me not to die." "Why didn't you go to a hospital?" "He wanted to call for help. I wouldn't let him. Frank said, 'I'll go to prison, Maggie. They'll lock me up and throw away the key.' And I knew he was right. A veteran shoots his sister, they'd crucify him. So we hiked back to his truck, drove to a clinic in town. I told them I'd fallen on barbed wire." Maggie looked at her daughter. "The doctor removed what he could, stitched me up, gave me antibiotics. The pain went away after a few weeks. The scar faded. I forgot about it." "You forgot you were shot?" "I chose to forget." Maggie's voice hardened. "Frank needed me to forget." "What happened to him?" The question Maggie had been dreading. 2 years later, he went back to those same woods, used the same rifle. Your father and I got the call from the Montana State Police. Suicide. She met Sarah's eyes. He left a letter. "It's in a wooden box in my closet. He apologized for shooting me. Said he couldn't live with what he'd done." Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, staring out at the Portland lights. "You protected him." "Yes." "And now you're dying because of it." "We don't know that I'm—" "Don't!" Sarah whirled around, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare tell me this isn't connected." A 30-year-old bullet fragment causing chronic inflammation, and you just happen to have cancer in the same spot? Her voice broke. You chose him over yourself, just like you always choose everyone over yourself. He was my brother. And I'm your daughter. Sarah's voice cracked like thunder. Did you ever think about that? About me? About Emma? You'd rather die with your secrets than let me help you. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Sarah wiped her eyes roughly. Dad died 5 years ago. Michael 10 years before that. Uncle Frank 30 years ago. And now you. Everyone I love just keeps leaving. And I'm so tired, Mom. I'm so goddamn tired of losing people. Maggie rose from her chair, crossed to her daughter, wrapped her arms around her. Sarah resisted for a moment, then collapsed into the embrace, sobbing against her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry, Maggie whispered. I'm so sorry, baby. They stood that way for a long time, two women holding each other against the weight of too many losses. The biopsy the next morning was quick but unpleasant. A needle puncturing skin, extracting tissue from the mass. Maggie lay still, Sarah holding her hand, both of them staring at the ceiling. The results would take 3 days. Those 3 days stretched like years. On the first day, Maggie sat by the Columbia River behind her house, watching the water flow. The wooden box sat beside her, the one containing Frank's letter. She hadn't opened it in years. Now she lifted the lid with careful fingers. Frank's photograph stared up at her. 19 years old in his military uniform, before Vietnam had hollowed out his eyes. Beneath the photo lay his discharge papers, a psychiatric evaluation from 1973 diagnosing combat fatigue. And the letter. She unfolded it with shaking hands, Frank's handwriting hurried and desperate. Maggie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Every day I wake up and see your face, the blood, and I know I don't deserve to be alive. I thought time would make it better, but it just gets worse. Mom died thinking I was a good son. Let her keep thinking that. Tell her I love her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Maggie refolded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box. She understood now what she hadn't understood at 19, or at 28, or even at 50. Frank hadn't been able to forgive himself, and she'd carried his guilt like a stone in her chest or a bullet in her neck ever since. On the second day, Emma came to visit. Sarah brought her after preschool, and the 4-year-old exploded into the house with her usual energy. Grandma, I made you something. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing by a blue river, a yellow sun, a house with a crooked chimney. The word family in careful crooked letters. That's you and Mommy and me, Emma explained, pointing to each figure. And we're all happy because you're not sick anymore. Maggie pressed the drawing to her chest, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. On the third day, the phone rang. Dr. Mitchell's office. The results were in. Maggie and Sarah returned to the hospital, leaving Emma with Mrs. Robertson again. Dr. Mitchell's office was small, cramped with medical books and framed diplomas. He wasn't alone. A woman in her 50s sat beside him, Dr. Rebecca Carter, the oncologist. Mrs. Sullivan, Sarah, thank you for coming in. Dr. Mitchell gestured to the empty chairs. This is Dr. Carter from our oncology department. Maggie's stomach dropped. You didn't bring in an oncologist for good news. Dr. Carter had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Sullivan, I've reviewed your biopsy results and imaging. The diagnosis is squamous cell carcinoma, a type of skin cancer that's metastasized to the lymph nodes in your neck. The word metastasized hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's hand found Maggie's, squeezed tight. Stage 3B, Dr. Carter continued. The tumor is 5 centimeters, which is significant. It's pressing against your carotid artery and has spread to multiple lymph nodes. She paused. The chronic inflammation from the bullet fragment likely contributed to the cellular changes that led to malignancy.
So the bullet caused the cancer, Sarah said flatly. It's impossible to say definitively, but chronic foreign body reaction is a known risk factor. The body's continuous inflammatory response to the metal can, over decades, lead to cellular mutation. Maggie felt numb. 30 years ago, she'd chosen to protect Frank. Now she was paying for that choice with her life. What are the options? Sarah's voice was clinical, professional, but Maggie heard the tremor underneath. Dr. Carter pulled out a chart. Option 1. Aggressive treatment. 6 weeks of radiation therapy to shrink the tumor, followed by chemotherapy, then surgery to remove what remains. With this approach, 5-year survival rate is approximately 60%. And without treatment? Maggie heard herself ask. Dr. Carter met her eyes. 6 to 12 months. Sarah made a sound, half gasp, half sob, but said nothing. The surgery carries significant risk, Dr. Carter continued. The tumor's proximity to the carotid artery means we'd be operating in a very delicate area. There's a risk of stroke, nerve damage, or death on the table. What would you do, Maggie asked, if it were your mother? Dr. Carter was quiet for a moment. I'd fight. But Mrs. Sullivan, this decision is yours alone. Maggie chose to fight. Not immediately. First, she went home and sat in Tom's old workshop, surrounded by sawdust and tools he'd never use again. She held the blue scarf in her hands and thought about Emma's drawing, about Sarah's tears, about all the people who'd left her and all the people she'd leave behind. Then she called Sarah and said 3 words. Let's do it. The radiation therapy began on a Monday morning in early November. The treatment room was cold and sterile, dominated by a massive machine that looked like something from a nightmare. Maggie lay on the table while technicians fitted her with a mesh mask to keep her head perfectly still. The mask pressed against her face, restricting her breathing, trapping her. Try to relax, the technician said through the intercom. Relax. While lying immobilized under a machine that would burn her from the inside out, Maggie closed her eyes and thought of the river, of Emma's laugh, of anything but the mask and the machine and the cancer eating through her neck. The radiation itself was invisible and painless. 5 minutes under the machine, 5 days a week, for 6 weeks. 30 treatments total. It didn't sound like much, but the effects were cumulative. After the first week, Maggie's neck turned pink, like a mild sunburn. The blue scarf irritated the skin now, but she wore it anyway. A familiar comfort in an unfamiliar hell. After the second week, the skin blistered and wept. She couldn't wear the scarf anymore. Sarah helped her apply cream to the burns every night. Gentle fingers on destroyed tissue. Maggie cried sometimes, not from the pain, but from the humiliation of needing help to dress herself. After the third week, swallowing became agony. Solid food was impossible. Sarah made protein shakes and soups, sitting beside her mother and coaxing her to take just one more sip. Maggie lost 12 pounds.
Her clothes hung on her frame like sheets on a scarecrow. The church ladies visited every week, bringing casseroles Maggie couldn't eat and prayers she desperately needed. Mrs. Robertson tended her garden. Sarah's colleagues at the hospital donated their sick leave hours so Sarah could cut back to part-time. The small town of Riverside wrapped its arms around Maggie Sullivan and refused to let her fall. But at night, alone in her bed, Maggie fell anyway. Emma visited on weekends. The 4-year-old had been told that Grandma was sick but getting better, a lie everyone conspired to maintain. Emma drew pictures of rainbows and flowers, decorated them with stickers, and hung them on Maggie's refrigerator like healing talismans. "When you're better, we can go to the river," Emma said one Saturday afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Maggie's bed, "and catch fish. Mommy says Grandpa Tom used to take you fishing." "He did," Maggie whispered, her voice raspy from the radiation. "He taught me everything he knew. Will you teach me?" "Yes, baby, I promise." It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. By week 4, Maggie could barely speak. Her vocal cords were swollen, her throat raw. She communicated in whispers and hand gestures. Sarah moved into the house, sleeping on the couch, becoming nurse and daughter and everything in between. One night, Sarah woke to the sound of her mother crying. She found Maggie in the bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. The woman reflected there was unrecognizable. Gaunt face, hollow eyes, neck covered in weeping burns, hair thin and brittle. "I look like a monster," Maggie whispered. Sarah came to stand behind her mother, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You look like a fighter." But Maggie shook her head. "Frank couldn't forgive himself for what he did to me. What if I can't forgive myself for what I'm putting you through? Mom, this isn't the same." "Isn't it?" I chose to keep his secret. I chose not to get treatment back then. This is my fault. No. Sarah turned her mother around, gripped her shoulders. Frank's PTSD was not your fault. His suicide was not your fault. And this cancer? Mom, you didn't choose this. You were trying to protect someone you loved. That's not a sin. That's love. Maggie collapsed into her daughter's arms, and they sank to the bathroom floor together, holding each other while Maggie sobbed out 30 years of guilt. Week 5 brought the first good news. Dr. Carter measured the tumor during a routine examination and smiled. Actually smiled. It's working. The tumor has shrunk from 5 centimeters to 3.8 inches. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in Maggie's chest. Sarah squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. "Does this mean—" Sarah's voice caught. "Does this mean she'll be okay?" "It means the cancer is responding to treatment. We'll reassess after radiation is complete, but this is excellent progress." That night, Sarah made Maggie's favorite soup. Her mother could only manage 3 spoonfuls, but they tasted like victory. Week 6 arrived with autumn turning to winter. The leaves had fallen from the trees, and the Columbia River ran cold and gray. Maggie's final radiation treatment fell on a Friday morning. The hospital staff, nurses and technicians who'd guided her through the worst weeks of her life, applauded when she emerged from the treatment room for the last time. "You did it, Mrs. Sullivan," the head technician said, hugging her gently. "You made it through." But the celebration was premature. That evening, Maggie developed a fever, 101 degrees. Sarah, ever the nurse, monitored it carefully. By midnight, it had climbed to 103. By 2 a.m., Maggie was shaking with chills, despite 3 blankets. "We're going to the ER," Sarah announced, already calling for an ambulance. It's probably just a reaction to the radiation, Maggie managed through chattering teeth. Dr. Mitchell said fevers were common. Mom, your immune system is compromised. We're not taking chances. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. As paramedics loaded Maggie onto the stretcher, she saw Mrs. Robertson watching from her window, concern etched on her elderly face. Emma's drawing, the one with family written in crooked letters, was taped to Maggie's refrigerator, the last thing she saw before the doors closed. At the hospital, Dr. Mitchell took one look at Maggie's blood work, and his face went grim. White blood cell count is critically low. You've developed neutropenic fever, which means your body can't fight infection. He ordered immediate intravenous antibiotics and admission to the hospital. By morning, Maggie's fever had broken. Dr. Mitchell smiled with relief. You gave us a scare, but you're stable now. We'll keep you for observation, run another CT scan to check the tumor's progress, and hopefully have you home by Monday. The CT scan was scheduled for Sunday afternoon. A routine procedure, Doctor. Mitchell assured them, just checking to make sure the tumor had responded well to radiation. Maggie lay in the machine, the familiar hum surrounding her, and tried not to think about what they might find. Sarah waited in the cafeteria with Emma, who'd been allowed to visit now that Grandma was better. An hour passed, then 2. Sarah's phone rang, Dr. Mitchell's number. Can you come back to radiology? Dr. Carter is here. We need to discuss the scan results. Sarah's stomach dropped. Scan results were supposed to take days to analyze. When they called you back immediately, it meant something was wrong. She left Emma with a volunteer and walked on shaking legs back to the radiology department. Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Carter stood outside the reading room, their faces carefully neutral, which meant bad news. What did you find? Sarah asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Dr. Carter gestured them into a consultation room. On the screen, Maggie's CT scan glowed in shades of gray and white. The good news is that the tumor in your mother's neck has shrunk significantly, down to 2.1 centimeters. That's nearly 60% reduction. And the bad news? Dr. Carter pulled up a different image, this one showing Maggie's chest and upper neck. We found additional foreign objects. Not just the one fragment we knew about. There are multiple metallic fragments scattered throughout the tissue, 7 pieces total, various sizes. Sarah stared at the screen. 7 pieces of bullet. 7 fragments of Frank's guilt, embedded in her mother's body for 30 years. The fragmentation pattern is inconsistent with a single long-range hunting accident, Dr. Carter continued carefully. This looks more like a close-range shot where the bullet struck bone and shattered. I know, Sarah said quietly. My uncle shot her at close range. He had PTSD. It was an accident. Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Carter exchanged glances. There's something else, Dr. Carter said. We sent the fragments to our forensic lab, standard procedure. The results came back this morning. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Sullivan, the fragments aren't all from the same bullet, or even the same gun. The room tilted. Sarah gripped the desk to steady herself. What? 2 different calibers. The larger fragments are from a rifle, consistent with a hunting rifle. But there are also smaller fragments from a handgun, likely a .45 caliber. And based on the scar tissue formation, those handgun fragments are older, much older. Perhaps 40 years. Sarah's mind raced. Her mother had been shot twice. Once by Frank 30 years ago. That story she knew. But before that, another shooting? Another secret? "Does my mother know about this?" Sarah asked. "Not yet. We wanted to discuss it with you first." Sarah looked at the scan, at the constellation of metal fragments scattered through her mother's body like shrapnel from a war zone. Each piece a secret. Each piece a burden carried in silence. "I need to talk to her," Sarah said. They found Maggie dozing in her hospital room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds. She looked small in the bed, diminished by treatment and illness. But when Sarah touched her hand, her eyes opened, still sharp, still present. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Mom," Sarah said gently, pulling a chair close to the bed. "We need to talk about the CT scan, about what they found." Maggie's face went still. "The cancer spread?" "No. The tumor is shrinking. But, Mom, they found 7 bullet fragments from 2 different guns, 2 different shootings." Sarah took her mother's hand. "When were you shot the first time?" For a long moment, Maggie said nothing. Then, slowly, tears began to slide down her cheeks. "I was hoping," she whispered, "that you'd never have to know." Maggie stared at her hands, twisted together in her lap like they were trying to hold something that kept slipping away. Sarah waited, knowing better than to push. Outside, the November sky was turning that particular gray that meant rain. Finally, Maggie spoke. "I was 18. It was 1984. Sarah pulled her chair closer, preparing herself for whatever was coming. "Your father and I had been dating for 2 years. He'd been back from Vietnam for about a year. Korea, actually. He served in the tail end of the Korean War as a young man, but he never talked about it much." Maggie's voice was rough from the radiation damage. "When Tom came home, he wasn't the same boy I'd fallen in love with. He had nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, sometimes violent." Sarah's chest tightened. She'd heard stories about her father's service, but always the sanitized versions, the heroic ones. "We were living together in a small apartment in Salem. Against my parents' wishes, of course, but I was young and in love and thought love could fix anything." Maggie's laugh was bitter. "One night, Tom had a nightmare, a bad one. He woke up, disoriented, grabbed the gun he kept in the nightstand, for protection, he said. I woke up to him pointing it at me, his eyes completely vacant. He didn't recognize me. Mom, he pulled the trigger, hit me in the shoulder." Maggie touched her left shoulder, where Sarah suddenly realized a scar had always hidden beneath her mother's clothing. The pain snapped him out of it. He dropped the gun and just broke down, sobbing, begging me to forgive him, saying he'd turn himself in. But you didn't let him. I told him I'd tripped going down the stairs and shot myself with his gun, accidentally. We went to the emergency room. I stuck to the story. The doctor was suspicious. Bullet wounds from falls don't make much sense, but I wouldn't budge. Maggie's voice dropped to a whisper. The surgeon removed the bullet, but said there were some fragments too small to safely extract. He said they'd probably stay there forever, harmless, just leave them alone. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. So you've been carrying pieces of Dad and pieces of Frank inside you all this time. Tom got help after that, real help. Therapy, medication, everything. He became the man you knew, the good father, the gentle husband. But I never forgot that night, the look in his eyes when he didn't know who I was. Maggie finally looked at Sarah. I never told him about the fragments. When he died 5 years ago,
He died thinking that bullet had been completely removed. I let him believe he hadn't permanently scarred me. But he did scar you. They both did.
They was sick, Sarah. Frank with his PTSD, Tom with his. They weren't bad men. They were broken men. And I loved them. Love doesn't mean you have to carry bullets for the rest of your life. Sarah's voice rose despite herself. Love doesn't mean you sacrifice your health, your safety, your life to protect people who hurt you. They didn't mean to hurt me, but they did. And you let them. You've spent your entire life protecting broken men and hiding your own wounds. Sarah stood pacing the small hospital room, and now you're dying because of it. These fragments caused chronic inflammation for 40 years, Mom. 40 years of your cells being damaged, mutating, becoming cancerous. The doctors said so. Maggie's face crumpled. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you've done to yourself? Yes. Maggie's voice broke. I understand that I chose love over safety. I understand that I protected the men I loved instead of protecting myself. I understand that Frank killed himself anyway, and Tom died of a heart attack, and all my sacrifice didn't save either of them. I understand that I've been carrying their guilt along with their bullets, and it's killing me. Tears streamed down her face. I understand all of it, Sarah. And I still don't know if I'd do anything differently. Sarah stopped pacing, staring at her mother. How can you say that? Because without Tom, I wouldn't have you and Michael. Without protecting Frank, I would have lost my brother years earlier than I did. Were those choices worth dying for? Maybe not. But they were worth living for at the time. That's all any of us can do. Make the best choice we can with what we know in that moment. The best choice would have been to report them, to get them help without nearly dying yourself. You didn't live through those times, Sarah. Men with PTSD weren't treated like victims. They were treated like criminals, like defects. Tom would have been dishonorably discharged, lost his benefits, probably gone to prison. Frank was already barely holding on. Prison would have destroyed him. Maggie shook her head. I made the choice I could live with. But you're not living with it. You're dying from it. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Before Maggie could respond, there was a knock on the door. Dr. Carter entered, her expression grave. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a complication. She pulled up a chair. Mrs. Sullivan, the fragments in your body have been there so long that they've become encapsulated in scar tissue. That's actually protected you from infection for decades. But now, with your immune system severely compromised from radiation, that protection has failed. You've developed an infection around several of the fragments. What does that mean? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. It means the fragments need to be surgically removed. All of them. Soon. Maggie's hand went to her throat, as if she could feel the metal inside her. How soon? Within the next few days, ideally. Your immune system is too weak to fight this infection, and it will spread. But Mrs. Sullivan, Dr. Carter leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm, you need to understand the risks. You're already weakened from 6 weeks of radiation therapy. Your body has been through tremendous trauma. Surgery of this nature, in your condition, carries significant risk. There's approximately a 30% chance of surgical complications. that could be fatal. And if I don't have the surgery? The infection will spread to your bloodstream. Sepsis. Without surgery, I'd give you 2 to 3 weeks. The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Her mother, who'd spent her entire life protecting others, now faced a choice where the only person she could protect was herself. "What if the surgery is successful?" Maggie asked quietly. "Then we remove the infection source, allow you to heal, and proceed with chemotherapy in a few months. The cancer prognosis remains good, 60%, 5-year survival." Maggie looked at Sarah, then at the window where rain had begun to streak the glass. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow morning," Dr. Carter said. "I'm sorry I can't give you longer." After Dr. Carter left, Sarah sat beside her mother's bed. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Maggie said, "If I die on that operating table, I want you to tell Emma that her grandmother was brave." "Mom, don't—" "Let me finish." Maggie gripped Sarah's hand. "Tell her I was brave, but also tell her the truth. Tell her about the bullets, about Frank and Tom, about all of it. Tell her that sometimes love means sacrifice, but it should never mean silence. Tell her to speak up when she's hurt, to ask for help, to never carry anyone's guilt but her own." Her voice broke. "Promise me you'll tell her." "I promise," Sarah whispered. "But you're going to tell her yourself. You're going to survive this surgery and live to teach her how to fish and watch her grow up." Maggie smiled sadly. "I hope so, baby. I really do." That night, Sarah went to her mother's house to collect a few personal items. The November darkness came early, and the wooden house by the river felt empty and cold. She moved through rooms filled with memories. Tom's workshop still cluttered with unfinished projects. Michael's baseball trophies gathering dust on a shelf. Photographs of a family that kept shrinking. In her mother's bedroom, Sarah found the wooden box sitting on the nightstand. The lock had been broken, the lid slightly ajar. Inside, she found what her mother had told her about. Frank's photograph in his military uniform, young and whole. His discharge papers, the psychiatric evaluation that said combat fatigue when it meant a broken soul. And the letter. Sarah unfolded it with trembling hands and read Frank's final words. The apology. The guilt. The decision to end his life. She understood now why her mother had kept these secrets, not out of shame, but out of love. Misguided, perhaps. Self-destructive, certainly, but love nonetheless. Beneath Frank's letter, Sarah found something else, another envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in handwriting she recognized as her father's. The postmark read April 1984, a month after he'd shot her mother. Sarah hesitated, then opened it. "Maggie, I don't have the words to tell you what I've done. How can I apologize for nearly killing the woman I love? The doctors say it's PTSD, that the nightmares make me dangerous. They want me to check myself into the VA hospital, but I'm afraid if I do, I'll lose you. You're the only thing keeping me alive. I know that's not fair to you. I know I should be stronger, but without you, I don't think I can make it. I'm sorry for being so weak. I'm sorry for everything. I love you more than my own life." Tom. Sarah read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her father, the gentle man who'd taught her to ride a bike and fish in the Columbia River, had been terrified of losing her mother, had been suicidal without her. And her mother, barely 18 years old, had chosen to carry that burden rather than risk losing him. Sarah carefully replaced both letters in the box and carried it back to the hospital. She found her mother awake, staring at the ceiling. "I read Dad's letter," Sarah said quietly, setting the box on the bedside table. Maggie turned her head slowly. "I didn't know you knew about that one. It was under Frank's letter." Sarah sat down, exhausted. "Mom, Dad wrote that he'd kill himself if you left him." "That's not love. That's emotional hostage-taking. He was sick. I know he was sick. But you were 18 years old, and he made his survival your responsibility. That wasn't fair to you." Maggie was silent for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "It wasn't fair." "But life isn't fair, Sarah. Your father got help. He became a good man, a good husband, a good father. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything. But it shouldn't have cost you your life." Before Maggie could respond, Dr. Carter entered with Dr. Mitchell. Their expressions were serious. "Mrs. Sullivan, we need to schedule your surgery," Dr. Carter said. "Your fever spiked again an hour ago. The infection is progressing faster than we anticipated. We need to operate tomorrow morning, Monday at 7 a.m. "That soon?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I'm sorry." "We're out of time." Dr. Carter explained the procedure in detail. They would make an incision along Maggie's neck and shoulder, remove all 7 bullet fragments, debride the infected tissue, and remove as much of the remaining tumor as possible. The surgery would take between 4 and 6 hours. Due to the proximity to major blood vessels and nerves, the risks were significant: stroke, paralysis, bleeding, death. "I need you to sign a consent form," Dr. Carter said gently, producing a clipboard. Maggie took the pen with shaking hands. She stared at the form for a long time before signing her name. After the doctors left, Sarah helped her mother into the bathroom to wash up before surgery. As Maggie raised her arms to remove her hospital gown, Sarah saw both scars for the first time, the one on her neck from Frank, the one on her shoulder from Tom. Puckered tissue, faded but permanent. Her mother's body was a map of violence done by men who'd loved her. "I never noticed," Sarah whispered. "How did I never notice?" "You weren't supposed to. That was the point." Maggie lowered her arms. "Help me with my hair?" Sarah gently washed her mother's thin, brittle hair, careful not to pull. They didn't speak. There was too much to say and no words adequate to say it. That night, Sarah slept in a chair beside her mother's bed. At 2 a.m, she woke to find Maggie awake, crying silently. "Mom? I'm scared, Sarah. I don't want to die." Sarah climbed into the hospital bed, careful of the IVs, and held her mother like she'd held Emma through nightmares. "You're not going to die. You're going to fight, and you're going to win." "What if I don't?" "Then I'll make sure Emma knows her grandmother was the strongest woman I ever met. That you survived things that would have destroyed other people. That you loved too much and sacrificed too much, but that came from a good heart." Sarah's voice broke. "And I'll make sure she never makes your mistakes. I'll teach her that love doesn't mean silence, that protecting someone shouldn't cost you everything." Maggie held her daughter tighter. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." "You were strong enough. You're still here, aren't you?" They fell asleep that way, mother and daughter intertwined, while the machines beeped softly and the night stretched on. Morning came too quickly. Sarah woke to nurses bustling in, preparing Maggie for surgery. She was given a surgical gown, cap, and booties. The anesthesiologist came to explain the process. Dr. Carter stopped by to answer final questions. At 6:30, they wheeled Maggie toward the operating room.
Sarah and Emma, who'd arrived early with Mrs. Robertson, walked alongside the gurney. Emma held her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, after you're better, we'll go catch fish, right?" "Right, baby." Maggie's voice was hoarse. "The biggest fish in the Columbia River." "Promise?" Maggie looked at Sarah, then back at Emma. "I promise I'll try my very best." They reached the doors to the surgical suite. This was as far as family could go. Sarah leaned down and kissed her mother's forehead. "I love you, Mom. You're going to be fine." "I love you too. Both of you. So much." Maggie reached up with her free hand and touched Sarah's cheek. "If something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen." "But if it does, the blue scarf is in my closet at home. I want you to have it." "Mom!" "And there's a letter in the wooden box, in a sealed envelope. I wrote it last week. Read it, if I don't come back." The doors began to swing open. The nurses were ready to take Maggie through. "Mom, you're coming back," Sarah said firmly, even as tears streamed down her face. Maggie smiled, a real smile, despite everything. "Then I guess you won't need to read the letter." The gurney disappeared through the doors. Sarah and Emma stood in the hallway watching until they couldn't see anything anymore. The surgery was estimated at 4 to 6 hours. Sarah and Emma settled into the surgical waiting room, a depressing space with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. Mrs. Robertson arrived with coffee and muffins that Sarah couldn't eat. Other families came and went, their own dramas playing out in parallel. After 2 hours, a nurse updated them. "Surgery is progressing well. Dr. Carter says they've successfully removed 3 fragments so far." After 4 hours, "They've encountered some complications with the larger fragments. Surgery will take longer than expected." After 5 hours, Sarah's phone buzzed, her ex-husband offering to come sit with them. She declined. This felt too private, too raw to share with someone who'd chosen to leave their family. After 6 hours, Emma fell asleep curled up on 3 chairs pushed together, her head in Sarah's lap. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair and thought about generational trauma, about patterns of silence and sacrifice, about how she was going to break this cycle, for Emma's sake. After 7 hours, Sarah was pacing, unable to sit still. Mrs. Robertson prayed quietly in the corner, rosary beads sliding through her weathered fingers. After 8 hours, the doors to the surgical suite opened. Dr. Carter emerged, still in her surgical cap and gown. Her face was exhausted but unreadable. Sarah stood, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "How is she?" Dr. Carter walked toward them, pulled down her mask. "She's alive." Sarah's knees buckled. Mrs. Robertson caught her, holding her up. "But?" Sarah asked, because she could hear the word hanging in the air. "There were complications. Her heart stopped during surgery. We had to resuscitate her. It took 8 minutes to get her back." Dr. Carter gestured toward the chairs. "Please, sit down." Sarah sat, pulled Emma onto her lap even though the girl was too big for it. "Is she going to be okay?" "The surgery was successful in removing all 7 fragments. We also excised 95% of the tumor. The margins are clean, no cancer cells at the edges." Dr. Carter paused. "But the cardiac arrest during surgery, combined with her already weakened state from radiation and infection, has left her in critical condition.
She's in the ICU now, sedated. The next 72 hours will be crucial. If she makes it through that, her prognosis improves significantly. Can I see her? In about an hour, once she's settled in ICU. But Sarah, Dr. Carter's voice softened. Prepare yourself. She's on a ventilator, multiple IVs, monitors everywhere. It's going to be hard to see. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Carter stood to leave, then turned back. Your mother is one of the strongest patients I've ever treated. During the surgery, when her heart stopped and we were doing chest compressions, I kept thinking about everything she's survived. 2 gunshot wounds, 30 years of chronic inflammation, 6 weeks of radiation therapy, and still fighting. That kind of strength doesn't come from nowhere. She's fighting for you and Emma. Don't forget that. After Dr. Carter left, Sarah held Emma and cried, not from despair, but from sheer exhaustion and relief and terror, all mixed together. An hour later, a nurse came to take them to the ICU. Maggie lay in a bed surrounded by machines. A ventilator tube protruded from her mouth. IVS snaked into both arms. Monitors beeped and flashed numbers Sarah understood from her nursing training: blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation. All critically low but stable. Her mother's neck was heavily bandaged. The blue scarf was gone, replaced by sterile gauze. But she was breathing. Her heart was beating. She was alive. Sarah sat beside the bed and took her mother's hand, careful of the IV, and whispered, "You did it, Mom. You survived. Now you just have to keep surviving." Emma, frightened by the machines, stayed back with Mrs. Robertson. But Sarah stayed, holding her mother's hand, watching the monitors, counting each heartbeat like a prayer. Maggie woke on the 3rd day. Sarah had been sitting beside her mother's bed when the monitors changed rhythm. A subtle shift in the beeping pattern that made her look up from the book she wasn't really reading. Maggie's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched against the white sheets. "Mom?" Sarah leaned forward, gripping her mother's hand. "Mom, can you hear me?" Maggie's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. The ventilator tube prevented her from speaking, but her gaze found Sarah's face and held it. "You're okay," Sarah said, tears already streaming. "You're in the ICU. You made it through surgery. You're going to be okay." Maggie's eyes filled with tears that slid sideways into her hair. Within an hour, the respiratory team removed the ventilator tube. Maggie coughed violently, her throat raw. A nurse brought ice chips that Maggie could barely swallow. "Emma?" Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. "She's fine. She's at school. I'll bring her this afternoon." Sarah adjusted her mother's pillow. "Mom, the surgery was successful. Dr. Carter removed all the fragments, all 7 pieces, and 95% of the tumor. You're cancer-free." Maggie closed her eyes, fresh tears leaking out. "Frank, Tom, they're finally out." "Yes, Mom. They're out." Over the next week, Maggie slowly regained strength. She graduated from ice chips to broth to soft foods. The bandages on her neck were changed daily, revealing an angry red scar that ran from her ear to her collarbone. She would carry this scar forever. But unlike the others, this one represented survival, not violence. Dr. Carter visited every day. On the 5th day post-surgery, she brought a small metal container. "I thought you might want these," she said, setting it on Maggie's bedside table. Inside were the 7 bullet fragments. They looked smaller than Sarah had imagined, pieces of metal no bigger than pebbles, some jagged, some smooth from decades inside her mother's body. Maggie stared at them for a long time without speaking. "We can dispose of them if you prefer," Dr. Carter said. "No." Maggie's voice was stronger now, though still raspy. "I want to keep them." After Dr. Carter left, Sarah picked up the container, studied the fragments. "What are you going to do with them?" "I don't know yet." "But I carried them for 40 years. Seems wrong to just throw them away." "They almost killed you." "They also led you to find the cancer. If Dr. Carter hadn't been looking for the first fragment, we never would have found the others, never would have found the tumor, until it was too late." Maggie met her daughter's eyes. "In a strange way, Frank and Tom saved my life." Even after death, Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. Her mother's ability to find grace in trauma was both inspiring and frustrating. 10 days after surgery, Maggie was discharged from the hospital. Sarah drove her home to the house by the Columbia River. November had given way to early December, and the first snow of winter dusted the ground. Emma exploded from the car, racing to the front door. "Grandma's home!" Grandma's home. Inside the house was warm. Church ladies had cleaned and stocked the refrigerator. A banner hung across the living room. "Welcome home, Grandma," in Emma's crooked handwriting, decorated with glitter and stickers. Maggie stood in her living room, the same living room where Tom had read bedtime stories to Sarah and Michael, where she'd hosted countless Sunday dinners, where she'd lived alone for 5 years after Tom died, and wept. "I didn't think I'd see this place again," she whispered. "But you did." Sarah wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulders. "You're here. You're alive, and you're going to stay that way." That night, after Emma had gone to bed in the guest room, Sarah and Maggie sat in the living room drinking tea. The blue scarf lay across Maggie's lap. She'd asked Sarah to bring it from the closet, though she couldn't wear it yet over her healing incision. "There's something I need to tell you," Maggie said, "about the letter I mentioned before surgery." "The one in the wooden box?" "Yes. I want you to read it. Not because I think I'm going to die. I'm not giving up. But because there are things I need you to know. Things I should have told you years ago." Sarah retrieved the box from her mother's bedroom. Inside, beneath Frank's and Tom's letters, was a third envelope, sealed. Sarah's name written in her mother's careful handwriting. She opened it and read, "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I didn't survive the surgery. I want you to know I'm not afraid of dying. I've been living on borrowed time since I was 18 years old, twice over. Every year since then has been a gift. What I am afraid of is leaving you with my mistakes. So I'm writing this to tell you what I should have said while I was alive. Carrying other people's guilt will destroy you. I protected your father after he shot me because I loved him and because I was young and believed love could heal anything. I was wrong. Love can't heal PTSD. Only proper treatment can do that. Your father eventually got help, but I wasted years suffering in silence first. I protected Frank because he was my brother and because I couldn't bear to lose him twice, once to Vietnam, once to prison. But I lost him anyway. He killed himself 2 years after shooting me, and I've spent 28 years wondering if I'd done the right thing. I still don't know. What I do know is this. I spent my whole life prioritizing other people's pain over my own. I thought that made me strong. It didn't. It made me a martyr. And martyrs die for their causes. Don't be like me, Sarah. When you're hurt, say so. When you need help, ask for it. Don't carry bullets for the people you love. Don't let their wounds become your scars. Tell Emma about me. Tell her about Frank and Tom and Michael. Tell her the whole truth, the good and the ugly. Tell her that sometimes people we love hurt us. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we can't save them. Tell her that silence isn't strength. Speaking up is. I love you more than words can express. You and Emma are my greatest accomplishments, not because of anything I did, but because of who you are. You're stronger than I ever was. You're braver than I ever could be. Live your life loudly, Sarah. Don't whisper your pain. Scream it if you have to. All my love, Mom. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, her mother was watching her. I'm not going to need this letter, Sarah said, her voice thick, because you're not going anywhere. But Mom, thank you for finally being honest, for finally trusting me with the whole truth. I should have trusted you years ago. Maybe. But you're trusting me now. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling in the fireplace, the river flowing outside the window. Finally, Sarah said, I have an idea about the bullet fragments. What kind of idea? A ceremony. To let them go. To let Frank and Tom go. To let all of it go. Maggie looked at her daughter, then at the blue scarf in her lap. Tell me more. 2 weeks later, on December 21st, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, they gathered at the riverbank behind Maggie's house. Sarah had invited a small group: Emma, Mrs. Robertson, Dr. Carter, and Pastor Williams from Riverside Community Church. The day was cold but clear, the Columbia River running fast and dark. Emma had spent the afternoon making paper boats, 7 of them, 1 for each bullet fragment. She decorated them with crayons and markers, turning instruments of violence into objects of beauty. Pastor Williams led them in prayer, his voice carrying across the water. We gather today to release what was carried too long, to honor the past while choosing not to be bound by it, to forgive those who hurt us and forgive ourselves for the hurt we caused by staying silent. Maggie stood at the water's edge, the metal container in her hands. Sarah and Emma stood on either side of her. The scar on her neck was visible now. She'd stopped trying to hide it. She wore the blue scarf over her shoulders like a shawl, no longer as concealment, but as remembrance. These pieces of metal lived inside me for 40 years, Maggie said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. One set from Tom, who I loved and who loved me but couldn't control his nightmares. One set from Frank, who I loved and who couldn't forgive himself for hurting me. She opened the container, let everyone see the fragments. They shot me, but they didn't mean to. They were broken by war, by trauma, by a system that sent them to fight, but never taught them how to heal. I forgive them. I forgave them years ago. What I haven't done until now is forgive myself. Her voice broke. Sarah squeezed her hand. I forgive myself for thinking I could save them, for staying silent when I should have spoken, for carrying their guilt along with their bullets, for thinking that love meant sacrifice instead of honesty. Maggie looked at Emma. My granddaughter taught me something. She draws pictures of our family and writes Family with that beautiful spelling mistake. And in those pictures, we're always happy, always together, always whole. She turned back to the river. I want to be whole, Emma. So I'm letting go of the past, all of it. One by one, Maggie placed the 7 fragments into Emma's paper boats. Emma carefully launched each boat into the current. They floated downstream, bobbing on the dark water, carrying their cargo of pain and memory toward the Pacific Ocean. The group watched in silence as the boats became distant dots, then disappeared entirely around a bend in the river. "They're gone, Grandma," Emma said, slipping her small hand into Maggie's. "Yes, baby, they're gone." Dr. Carter stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, I have something for you." She handed Maggie a folder. "Your latest test results came in this morning. I wanted to wait to tell you in person. You're officially cancer-free. The margins were completely clear. Your blood work is normal. You'll need quarterly scans for the next 5 years, but as of today, you're in full remission." Maggie's knees buckled. Sarah and Emma caught her, held her up between them, 3 generations of women holding each other against the weight of joy. That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and Maggie sat in the living room wrapping Christmas presents for Emma. It was a normal, mundane activity, tape and scissors and wrapping paper, but it felt miraculous after everything they'd survived. "I've been thinking," Maggie said, carefully folding paper around a doll Emma had requested, "about Frank and Tom. About how they couldn't forgive themselves." "What about it?" "I don't want to make their mistake. I don't want to spend the rest of my life punishing myself for choices I made when I was young and scared, and doing the best I could." She set down the scissors. "I'm going to volunteer at the Veterans Center in Portland. They have a support group for families of veterans with PTSD. I think I have something to offer them. A perspective on what it's like to love someone who's broken and dangerous." "Mom, that's wonderful. And I want to tell my story. Really tell it. Maybe write it down. Maybe share it at the support group. Because you were right. Silence isn't strength. Maybe if I'd spoken up years ago, if I'd admitted what happened, other families wouldn't have to go through what we did." Sarah hugged her mother carefully, mindful of the still healing scar. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me, too. For the first time in 40 years, I'm proud of myself for something other than keeping secrets." On Christmas morning, Emma woke before dawn and ran into Maggie's room. "Grandma! Grandma! Santa came!" Maggie let herself be pulled from bed, let Emma drag her to the living room, where presents waited under the tree Sarah had decorated. She watched her granddaughter tear through wrapping paper with wild abandon, shrieking with joy over each gift. Later, after breakfast, the 3 of them walked down to the riverbank. The day was cold but sunny, the Columbia glittering like diamonds. "Can we fish today, Grandma?" Emma asked. "You promised." Maggie looked at Sarah, who nodded. "If you're up for it, Mom." They spent the afternoon teaching Emma to fish, how to bait a hook, how to cast, how to wait patiently for a bite. Emma didn't catch anything, but she didn't mind. She was happy just being there with her grandmother and mother, the 3 of them together in the winter sunshine. As the sun began to set, painting the river gold and orange, Emma asked, "Grandma, are you all better now?" Maggie pulled her granddaughter close, wrapped the blue scarf around both their shoulders. "Yes, sweet girl.
I'm all better now.
And for the first time in 40 years, it was true. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry aren't visible to the world. Maggie Sullivan spent 40 years with 7 pieces of metal embedded in her body, silent witnesses to love, sacrifice, and the kind of loyalty that costs everything. Her story reminds us that protecting the people we love shouldn't mean destroying ourselves in the process. She survived 2 gunshot wounds from men suffering from PTSD, kept their secrets to spare them from consequences, and nearly died from the cancer those hidden bullets caused. But here's what makes her story so powerful. She chose to let go. Standing by the Columbia River with her daughter and granddaughter, she finally released those fragments into the water. Not just the metal, but the guilt, the silence, the weight of decades spent carrying other people's pain.
Her journey teaches us that it's never too late to speak our truth, to ask for help, to forgive ourselves for the sacrifices we thought we had to make. Real strength isn't suffering in silence. It's finding the courage to say, "I need help," and meaning it. Have you ever kept silent to protect someone you loved, only to realize the silence hurt you more? What would you tell your younger self about the difference between love and self-sacrifice? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.